John was a curious boy growing up in a small town in the United States. His world was filled with books, imagination, and a deep sense of adventure. He wasn't from a family with a lot of money to travel or explore the world, but he had something that kept his dreams alive, a vivid imagination. One of his earliest and most cherished memories was discovering a book about the wonders of the world. One particular image caught his eye, the Eiffel Tower. The photograph, with its towering iron lattice against the backdrop of the Parisian skyline, was so striking that it planted a seed in young John's heart. Every time he flipped through the pages of that book, his eyes always lingered on that image. He imagined what it would be like to stand beneath the tower, to gaze up at its grandeur, and to experience the magic of Paris. He dreamed of walking along the Seine, gazing at the Louvre, and sitting at a cafe, sipping espresso while watching the world go by. For a young boy with no means of traveling, it was an impossible dream. But it was also a persistent one, rooted deep in his heart. John's imagination was his escape, especially during the quiet, slow-paced days of his childhood. In a town where not many people traveled far from home, the idea of Paris seemed so distant, so foreign, and almost impossible. His family's finances were stretched thin, and vacations were reserved for practical destinations, like visiting relatives in nearby towns or camping trips. As much as his parents loved him, trips to places like Paris were far out of the question. Yet, despite the limitations of his environment, John didn't let go of his dream. He kept it tucked away in his mind, nurturing it in the same way a gardener tends to a seed. Whenever life felt heavy, or when he was overwhelmed by the mundanity of schoolwork and daily chores, he would retreat into that mental image of the Eiffel Tower, his symbol of adventure and possibility. One evening, after finishing his homework and sitting by the window, John made a promise to himself. He was around 12 years old at the time, and he knew that the world was vast and filled with wonders, but Paris seemed to be the most unreachable. One day, he told himself, "I will see the Eiffel Tower with my own eyes." He didn't know when that day would come, or how he would ever manage to get there, but that promise was made, and it stuck with him throughout his life. It wasn't just the tower that captivated him, it was everything Paris represented. It was a city of art, culture, and history, far beyond his small town in the US. It represented freedom, excitement, and the possibility of new experiences. To John, standing in Paris, in front of the Eiffel Tower, was the epitome of success, a marker of the life he hoped to build for himself. As John grew older, life became increasingly demanding. He focused on his education, then career, and eventually building a family. The dream of going to Paris, while never forgotten, became something he put on the back burner. There were always responsibilities, bills to pay, and priorities that took precedence over personal dreams. His career took him down a solid path, and he became a dedicated employee, working hard to provide for his family. Every year, John would tell himself, "Maybe next year, I'll start planning for that trip." But as the years went by, other life events seemed to take center stage: his children's education, home renovations, and his own professional goals. The Eiffel Tower remained a distant dream, just an image in a childhood book. The older John got, the more life seemed to get in the way. The demands of work, the challenges of raising a family, and the realities of adult life seemed to keep the dream of visiting Paris at arm's length. For many years, it was something John would get to when he had the time, the money, and the freedom. But as much as life seemed to take him further from that dream, he never let go of the spark of desire. That childlike wish to see the Eiffel Tower was buried deep, always waiting for the right moment to resurface. It was like a quiet song playing in the background of his life, present, but not always acknowledged. At 65 years old, John stood at the threshold of a new chapter in his life. After decades of working tirelessly, putting in long hours at the office, managing projects, and building a career, he was finally about to retire. The moment had come to step away from the daily grind, and John found himself facing an unfamiliar but welcome freedom. His body had begun to feel the toll of years of work, and his mind, once sharp and constantly racing with deadlines, was now filled with a quieter rhythm of reflection. The retirement party was a modest affair. Colleagues gathered in a conference room, offering congratulations, kind words, and a few heartfelt toasts. John, ever humble, smiled through it all, grateful for the relationships he had built over the years. Yet, as the festivities wound down and the office emptied out, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions: relief, nostalgia, and, in some small part, a quiet sense of loss. The routine of his professional life had been so deeply ingrained in him that, even as he embraced the idea of freedom, he wondered what would come next. As John drove home that afternoon, the weight of the years of work seemed to lift from his shoulders. But, for the first time in a long while, a different weight replaced it, the weight of unfulfilled promises and dreams deferred. In the days following his retirement, John found himself spending more time alone. His wife, Linda, was still working, and the quiet house felt both spacious and a bit too empty. As he sipped his morning coffee, John would sit at the kitchen table and look out the window, reflecting on his life. It was during these moments of stillness that memories began to surface, memories of his childhood, of the dreams he once held, and of the promise he made to himself all those years ago. The promise to see the Eiffel Tower. John thought about the years that had passed since then. The youthful optimism he had felt as a boy seemed so distant now. There had been so many reasons he hadn't made that trip. There had always been something more urgent: career milestones, raising children, paying bills, and ensuring that his family was taken care of. Even as he climbed the ranks at work, the dream of Paris, once so vivid, had faded into the background. But now, in the stillness of retirement, those dreams resurfaced with unexpected clarity. He realized that time was no longer something he could take for granted. The years ahead of him were a precious gift, and as much as he had accomplished in his career, there were still things he wanted to do, things he had promised himself he would do. The Eiffel Tower, the symbol of his childhood dreams, stood as a reminder that there were promises left unfulfilled. John had spent a lifetime fulfilling the needs and expectations of others, his boss, his colleagues, his children, but now, it was time to fulfill his own long-held desire. He could no longer wait for the perfect moment to come. The time was now. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold, John sat down with Linda at their kitchen table, the same table where he had spent countless hours over the years, discussing everything from family matters to financial plans. But tonight, the conversation was different. This time, John was not talking about the future of his business or the next project. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "Linda, do you remember when I was a kid?" he began, his voice a bit hesitant but filled with resolve. "I used to talk about seeing the Eiffel Tower in Paris. I promised myself that one day I would go there. I never thought it would take this long, but I think it's time." Linda, who had always supported John's dreams and ambitions, looked at him with a knowing smile. She had heard him speak of Paris many times over the years, but never in the context of actually going. She saw the sincerity in his eyes and felt the weight of his words. "I remember," she said softly. "You've always talked about that dream, but we've always had other priorities. The kids, the house, your career, it's always been something for someday." John nodded, his hands resting on the table. I've spent my life making sure everyone else was taken care of, and I don't regret it. But now, Linda, I think it's time for me to take care of my own dreams. I want to go to Paris. I want to see the Eiffel Tower. It's something I've promised myself for as long as I can remember." Linda's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. "And you should. It's not too late. We've worked hard all these years, and now we have the time. If this is your dream, then let's make it happen. Together." John felt a weight lift off his chest. He had spent so many years putting others first, and now, at long last, he could focus on a dream that was his own. He had no more excuses, no more waiting. The promise he made to himself as a child was no longer just a fantasy, it was about to become a reality. With Linda's encouragement and support, John made the decision that this would be the moment to act. He would fulfill his childhood dream of seeing the Eiffel Tower, and he would do it with the person who had been by his side through every stage of his life. It wasn't just about traveling to Paris, it was about embracing the second act of his life, one where he could finally chase the dreams that had been put on hold for so long. For John, this trip to Paris would be a celebration of not only the Eiffel Tower, but also of a life well lived and the promise of new adventures ahead. This moment of retirement marked a turning point for John, as he reflected on his life's work and accomplishments, while recognizing that some dreams, like seeing the Eiffel Tower, had yet to be realized. It was through these moments of quiet reflection that John found the clarity and courage to act, and he decided that now, with the support of his wife Linda, was the time to make that long-held childhood dream a reality. After John made the life-changing decision to fulfill his childhood dream of seeing the Eiffel Tower, the excitement kicked in, but so did the overwhelming task of planning the trip. For years, Paris had been just a distant thought in his mind, an idea he would think about occasionally, but never seriously consider. Now, with Linda by his side and the freedom of retirement ahead of him, John dove headfirst into the planning process. The first step was research. John, armed with a laptop, started reading everything he could about Paris, guidebooks, travel blogs, and even posts on online forums. He wanted to make sure they didn't miss out on anything important. It wasn't just about the Eiffel Tower, it was about experiencing Paris in its entirety. The museums, the neighborhoods, the food, the culture, John wanted to soak in everything the city had to offer. Linda, meanwhile, had a different approach. While John was meticulously reading reviews of hotels and restaurants, Linda was dreaming about the less structured parts of the trip. She was interested in the charm of walking down cobblestone streets, sitting in cafes, and visiting local markets. They both had different ways of experiencing a place, but that was what made them such a great team. While John made the detailed plans, Linda encouraged him to leave room for spontaneous moments, the kind that could lead to the most memorable experiences. One of the key decisions was when to go. The couple debated the timing, considering everything from weather to crowds to the activities they wanted to experience. After much discussion, they decided on a spring trip. The weather in Paris during spring was mild, and the city would be in full bloom, with gardens and parks coming alive with color. The Eiffel Tower would shine in the spring sunlight, and the streets of Paris would have a special kind of energy as locals enjoyed the warm days. John was also conscious of the fact that Paris could get crowded in the summer, especially near major landmarks like the Eiffel Tower. By going in the spring, they hoped to experience the city at a time when it wasn't too packed with tourists but still vibrant and full of life. Linda was thrilled about the idea of visiting Paris in spring, imagining the outdoor cafes, the flowers blooming, and the chance to explore the city without the intense summer heat. John, on the other hand, found comfort in knowing that the timing would allow them to take their time and enjoy the city at a more relaxed pace. Next came the more practical side of the planning, budgeting. They had saved up for this trip over the years, but now it was time to sit down and figure out exactly how much they were willing to spend on everything: flights, accommodations, meals, and activities. John was used to managing finances, and this part of the planning came naturally to him. He made sure they had a comfortable budget for everything, without being too extravagant. They decided to book their flights and hotel early, ensuring they got the best deals. John compared flight prices, looking for the most convenient times and affordable options. After narrowing it down, they booked their flights from their home city to Paris, feeling the excitement build with every confirmation email that came through. For accommodations, they chose a boutique hotel in a charming neighborhood on the left bank, close to the Seine River. John and Linda both liked the idea of staying in a place that had character, a hotel that felt personal and authentic rather than a generic, big chain option. It was important to them that they stayed in a location that would give them easy access to the main sites while also offering a true Parisian experience. The hotel was a cozy, 3-story building with flower boxes hanging from the windows, and the inside was decorated with warm, earthy tones. It felt just like the Paris they had dreamed of, intimate, welcoming, and full of character. As their departure date grew closer, John and Linda began mapping out the itinerary. They didn't want to overschedule, but they also didn't want to miss out on the essential sights of Paris. They knew the Eiffel Tower would be at the top of their list, but they also wanted to visit the Louvre, take a boat cruise along the Seine, and stroll through Montmartre. Linda had always wanted to visit the Luxembourg Gardens, so they set aside time to do that as well. They also decided to have a leisurely day exploring the Marais district, known for its historic architecture, trendy boutiques, and vibrant atmosphere. John, ever the planner, made sure to include a visit to the Arc de Triomphe and a few other iconic landmarks, but he was also determined to leave room for spontaneous adventures, like finding a charming cafe and enjoying a quiet afternoon together. One of the most exciting parts of the planning process was deciding on the food they wanted to try. John, having read about Parisian cafes, bistros, and pâtisseries, eagerly added a few must-try restaurants to the list. Linda was particularly excited about sampling authentic French pastries, like croissants and éclairs, while John dreamed of enjoying a classic French onion soup or a rich duck confit. As the trip drew closer, John and Linda felt a sense of growing excitement. The weeks leading up to their departure were filled with small preparations, packing, checking their documents, and making sure everything was set for the big adventure. Linda even found herself daydreaming about the sights, sounds, and smells of Paris. She imagined themselves sitting in a cafe by the Seine, watching the world go by, feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces. John, too, was excited, but he also felt a sense of anticipation unlike any other. This was the culmination of a dream that had lived inside him for so long. It was more than just a trip to a foreign city, it was a personal milestone. It was his chance to finally fulfill a promise he had made to himself as a young boy. The Eiffel Tower was no longer just an image in a book or a dream from his childhood, it was real, and it was waiting for him. The process of planning the trip brought John and Linda even closer together. They both felt a deep sense of anticipation and excitement as they worked together to turn this dream into a reality. The trip to Paris wasn't just about seeing a famous landmark. It was about embracing the adventure of life and realizing that it's never too late to pursue the dreams that have always lingered in the heart. After months of anticipation, John and Linda finally arrived at the Eiffel Tower. It was an exhilarating moment for them both. This was the place that John had dreamed about since childhood. The Eiffel Tower, rising majestically above the city, was even more magnificent in person than he had ever imagined. As they approached the tower on foot, they could already see the people milling around the park below it, taking photos and enjoying the beautiful spring day. John felt a wave of excitement wash over him as he gazed up at the towering iron structure. Standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower was an emotional experience, something he had imagined countless times, but never believed would come true. Linda, noticing the look of awe on John's face, smiled warmly. She had known how important this moment was to him, and she was happy to see him so fulfilled. They stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. The sight of the Eiffel Tower against the backdrop of a bright blue sky was surreal. It almost felt like stepping into a dream. John turned to Linda, his voice filled with wonder. "I can't believe we're finally here," he said, his eyes misting over with emotion. Linda squeezed his hand. "It's real, John. And we're here, together." After soaking in the initial sight, John and Linda joined the line for tickets. The excitement was palpable, as they had both been waiting for this moment for so long. As they made their way to the base of the tower, they were handed tickets for the elevator ride. The tower was divided into multiple levels, and the plan was to ascend to the second floor first, where they could get a panoramic view of Paris. The elevator ride was smooth but thrilling. As they slowly ascended, John pressed his face to the glass, eagerly watching as the ground below began to recede. Linda, who was equally excited but more relaxed, looked out at the beautiful Parisian landscape stretching out before them. It was impossible to not be swept away by the sheer scale and beauty of the city below. When the elevator doors opened on the second floor, John stepped out with a sense of amazement. The view was absolutely breathtaking. Paris spread out before them, a vast sea of rooftops, tree-lined streets, and historical landmarks. John's heart raced as he tried to take in the beauty of the scene. The Louvre, the Seine, Montmartre, everything seemed so much more magnificent from this height. Linda stood next to him, equally in awe. "Look at it, John. It's perfect," she said, her voice soft with emotion. John nodded, his words caught in his throat. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now that it was here, he didn't know how to express the depth of his feelings. But John's journey wasn't over yet. He had always imagined reaching the very top of the Eiffel Tower, the highest point, where you could see the entire city beneath you, as if you were standing on top of the world. So, after taking in the views from the second floor, they decided to go all the way up to the third and final level. As they took the elevator to the summit, John felt a mixture of excitement and awe. This was the ultimate destination for him, the place where all his dreams about Paris and the Eiffel Tower had culminated. When they arrived at the top, they were greeted by a 360-degree view of the city, nothing short of spectacular. The Eiffel Tower's iron framework surrounded them, and the winds at this height added an exhilarating element to the experience. Looking down, Paris seemed like a model city, its streets perfectly laid out, the Seine winding through it like a silver ribbon, and the distant hills of Montmartre and beyond fading into the horizon. John felt like he could see everything from up here, every detail of the city that he had admired from books and movies, now laid out before him in reality. Linda, sensing John's awe, leaned over to him and whispered, "This is our moment, John. We did it." John turned to her, his face filled with gratitude. "We did it," he echoed. He had always imagined what it would be like, but nothing could prepare him for the overwhelming sense of accomplishment and joy that filled him in this moment. It wasn't just about reaching the top of the Eiffel Tower, it was about the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, the culmination of a promise he had made to himself all those years ago. As John stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower, a flood of emotions overwhelmed him. It wasn't just about the Eiffel Tower or Paris, it was about the journey that had brought him here. All those years of hard work, sacrifice, and delay had led him to this point. He thought about how many times he had almost forgotten about this dream, how many times he had put it off for other responsibilities. But now, here he was, living that dream, not just for himself, but also with the person who had been by his side through it all, Linda. John closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the breeze, the sound of people talking, and the quiet hum of the city below. He had promised himself, as a young boy, that he would one day see the Eiffel Tower. And now, standing here, he realized how much more this trip represented. It was a testament to his perseverance, to the importance of never letting go of your dreams, no matter how distant they may seem. Linda, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, took John's hand. She didn't need words to express her understanding. She knew exactly what this meant to him. They stood there together, silently taking in the grandeur of Paris, feeling both small and incredibly connected to something larger than themselves. John and Linda took photos together at the top of the Eiffel Tower. They both knew this was a moment they would cherish forever. As they posed for pictures with the tower in the background, John couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just a photo op, it was the story of their lives, their journey, and their shared dream. For John, this was more than just a vacation or a sightseeing trip, it was the fulfillment of a promise to himself. The Eiffel Tower was no longer just a symbol of his childhood dreams, it was now a symbol of perseverance, of waiting for the right time, and of never giving up on something that truly mattered. As they left the tower and made their way back down to the ground, John felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The dream he had carried for so long was now part of his reality, and nothing could take that away from him. The visit to the Eiffel Tower was the culmination of John's lifelong dream. It wasn't just about reaching the top of a famous landmark, it was about celebrating the journey, the fulfillment of promises, and the joy of sharing this experience with Linda. Standing on top of the Eiffel Tower, John felt a sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing that it was never too late to pursue the dreams that matter most. As John and Linda made their way down from the Eiffel Tower, the weight of the moment settled in. For John, it was a realization that his childhood dream had finally come true. The Eiffel Tower had always been more than just a famous landmark for him. It represented years of waiting, of deferring dreams in the face of life's demands. Now, standing at its base, having climbed to its summit and gazed out over Paris, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment that went far beyond the satisfaction of simply visiting a place he had always longed to see. The trip had been everything he had hoped for, and more. The tower wasn't just a metal structure, it was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that it was never too late to chase a dream, no matter how distant or delayed it may seem. In that moment, as they walked hand in hand, John felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had lived a full life, worked hard, raised a family, and provided for the ones he loved, but this trip, this dream, was his. Linda, watching John's expression as they exited the tower, knew exactly what he was feeling. She had seen him talk about the Eiffel Tower for decades, always with a mixture of yearning and wistfulness. Now, she saw him finally at peace, having fulfilled a promise he had made to himself as a young boy. It wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey, the years it took to arrive at this point, the patience and perseverance, and the support they had given each other along the way. Later that evening, as they sat at a quiet cafe near the Seine, John found himself reflecting on everything that had led him to this moment. Sipping his espresso, he looked across the table at Linda. The soft glow of the streetlights reflected in the water, casting a serene ambience around them. "I can't believe we're actually here," John said, his voice filled with awe. "I've dreamed about this for so long. It feels surreal to finally be standing where I always imagined I would." Linda smiled and reached across the table, taking his hand. "I know, John. I remember you talking about this when we were just kids, and I've always known how much it meant to you. It's been such a joy to watch you experience it." John paused, looking out at the quiet ripples of the Seine. The city around them was alive with people walking by, laughing, and enjoying the evening, but for John, this moment felt like his own personal celebration. His life had been full of responsibilities, hard work, and family milestones, but the Eiffel Tower, standing tall in the distance, marked something deeply personal, a dream that had lived in his heart for decades and had now become a part of his reality. "I guess I never realized how much I'd been waiting for this moment," John continued, his voice thoughtful. "It's not just the tower, it's what it represents. I've worked my whole life, put things off for the future, and always told myself I'd get to it later. But now I know, it's never too late to live those dreams, to make them happen." Linda nodded, her eyes softening. "It's true, John. Life goes by so fast, and we often get caught up in the day-to-day. But you've always said that seeing the Eiffel Tower was something that defined you, something you wanted to do before you didn't have the chance. You made it happen, and that's incredible." As they sat there, time seemed to slow down. The cafe, the river, and the twinkling lights of the city felt like the perfect backdrop to this moment of fulfillment. For John, it wasn't just about checking something off a list, it was about honoring the promise he had made to himself many years ago. The Eiffel Tower had become a symbol of perseverance, not just in reaching a destination, but in staying true to his dreams, no matter the obstacles. John realized that this trip, and this moment, would stay with him forever, not just because he had seen the Eiffel Tower, but because he had learned an important life lesson, that it's never too late to chase after the things that matter most. He had spent so many years focused on others, their needs, their goals, their ambitions, but this trip was for him. It was a reminder that self-care and following your own dreams was just as important as caring for others. "I feel like I've learned something," John said quietly, his gaze focused on the twinkling lights of Paris. "We spend so much of our lives working, planning, and taking care of things. But sometimes, we forget that the dreams we have, those things we set aside, are just as important. I didn't realize how much I needed this until now." Linda squeezed his hand. "You've given so much of yourself to everyone else. It's time to focus on you, John. This trip has shown us that it's okay to chase after what brings us joy, even when we're older. We don't need to wait for the perfect time." As the days in Paris unfolded, John and Linda began to feel a deep sense of renewal. The city, with its beautiful architecture, its art, its culture, and its promise of new adventures, became a metaphor for their own lives. The Eiffel Tower wasn't just a destination, it was a new beginning, a reminder that life was still full of possibilities, no matter how old you were. John began to think about the future differently. There were still so many places to visit, so many things to see, and countless experiences waiting for him and Linda. They had entered a new phase of their lives, one where they could embrace the things they had always dreamed about, without delay or hesitation. Their retirement wasn't the end of their story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. As they strolled through the streets of Paris, holding hands and taking in the sights, John felt a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The Eiffel Tower had been a long-held dream, but it had turned out to be more than just a personal goal. It had taught him that fulfillment wasn't about the destination, it was about the courage to pursue your dreams, no matter when you start. The Eiffel Tower, in all its grandeur, had come to symbolize so much more than a childhood dream fulfilled. It represented the courage to follow one's heart, the strength to keep promises to oneself, and the joy of experiencing life's adventures with the person you love. For John, it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, where the pursuit of dreams didn't end with age, it only grew more vibrant and meaningful with time. After spending several magical days in Paris, exploring the sights and savoring the moments of connection, John and Linda found themselves at the train station, ready to leave the city that had fulfilled one of John's lifelong dreams. As they boarded the train back to the airport, a bittersweet feeling settled over them. While they were excited to return home, there was also a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences they had shared in the City of Lights. John gazed out the window as the French countryside passed by, the familiar sights of Paris slowly fading into the distance. He had always imagined this moment, but it felt different now that it was actually happening. There was no more someday or one day, he had lived the dream. And it wasn't just about Paris, it was about the freedom, the joy of finally embracing something personal, something just for him. Linda noticed the thoughtful expression on his face and gently placed her hand on his arm. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with understanding. John turned to her and smiled, his eyes reflecting both contentment and a touch of nostalgia. "Yeah. I'm just thinking about how much this trip has meant to me. It's hard to leave, but I'm so glad we came. I'll never forget this." Linda nodded, knowing that John had finally realized the importance of chasing his dreams, no matter what stage of life he was in. This wasn't just a vacation for them, it was a transformation, a realization that they still had so much more to experience, together. Upon arriving back home, the couple was greeted with the familiar sights of their small town, the neighborhood, their home, the day-to-day routines that they had left behind during their time away. But something felt different. John had changed. He carried a sense of fulfillment, peace, and a newfound zest for life that wasn't there before. Back at home, the reality of everyday life settled in. There were bills to pay, calls to return, and errands to run. Yet, for John, it was no longer just a monotonous cycle. Each task, each routine felt lighter, somehow. He had lived a dream, and now, every moment of his life seemed to carry the weight of that experience. Even the most mundane chores held a sense of gratitude, a reminder that he was still living a life full of possibilities. Linda noticed the change in him. He was more present, more at peace with himself. The old John, who had always been too busy to think about personal dreams, was now embracing the smaller moments in life. He wasn't rushing anymore, and he didn't feel like he had to put everything else first. John had discovered that fulfillment didn't always come from hard work and accomplishment, it could come from experiencing joy and following one's passions. One of the most heartwarming parts of returning home was sharing their adventure with family and friends. John and Linda had kept in touch with their children and close relatives during the trip, sending photos and messages from Paris. Now that they were back, they were eager to sit down with their loved ones and relive the experience together. John and Linda hosted a small get-together at their home, inviting close friends and family members to hear all about their trip. As they shared stories of their visit to the Eiffel Tower, the sights they had seen, and the moments they had cherished, it became clear that this trip was more than just a vacation, it was a testament to the power of following through on dreams. John's passion and excitement were contagious, and it didn't take long for everyone in the room to feel the joy he had experienced. Their children, who had always known their father as a man of responsibility and practicality, were struck by how different he seemed. "Dad, you look happier," one of them remarked, noticing the renewed energy in his voice and the twinkle in his eye. John laughed, nodding in agreement. I am. It's amazing what traveling and following your dreams can do for you. The stories they shared, the laughter, and the moments of connection all felt so meaningful. It wasn't just about the places they had visited, it was about the transformation that had occurred in John, how a lifelong dream had reignited his joy for life, and how that joy had impacted everyone around him. In the quiet moments after the party, as John and Linda sat on their porch, reflecting on the trip, John found himself overwhelmed with gratitude. It wasn't just about the Eiffel Tower or the breathtaking views of Paris. It was about everything that had come with it, the lessons learned, the reconnection to his own desires, and the reaffirmation that life wasn't just about getting by. Life was about finding purpose, joy, and fulfillment, even in the later years. Linda, sitting beside him, turned to him with a smile. I think this trip has changed us, John. We've always lived for others, worked hard for our family. But we've learned that we can still have dreams for ourselves. It's never too late. John looked at her, his heart full. You're right. I've spent so many years thinking that certain things would always be out of reach, that there was no time. But this trip, it's made me realize that if we want something, we can make it happen. We just have to decide to go for it. As the weeks passed, John and Linda began to make new plans. The trip to Paris had inspired them both to think about what other dreams they might still want to chase, whether it was more travel, taking up new hobbies, or simply embracing a more adventurous spirit. John, once focused solely on the practicalities of life, was now eager to explore new experiences, live with more intention, and savor the little moments that brought him joy. Linda, who had always been a free spirit, was excited to see this new side of John. They began researching other destinations, talking about places they could visit next, and things they could try. Their retirement had opened up a world of possibilities that they hadn't fully realized before. For John, it wasn't just about traveling, it was about living a fuller, more intentional life, embracing opportunities that came his way, and letting go of the idea that dreams had an expiration date. As John and Linda settled back into their routine, they carried with them the lessons of their journey. The Eiffel Tower had become more than just a destination, it had become a symbol of what was possible when you dared to dream, no matter your age. It was a reminder that dreams don't expire, and that life's most meaningful moments often come when you least expect them. Their return home marked not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would continue to pursue their passions, support each other's dreams, and enjoy the simple pleasures that came with living life to its fullest. John knew that Paris would always be in his heart, but the most important lesson from his journey was that the adventure didn't end there. The real journey was one of continuous discovery, and he was just getting started. After returning home from their transformative trip to Paris, John and Linda were surprised to see how their journey had a ripple effect on those around them. The stories they shared about their adventure, particularly John's lifelong dream of visiting the Eiffel Tower, resonated deeply with their friends and family. Many of the people closest to them had long put their own dreams on hold, prioritizing work, family, or other responsibilities over personal aspirations. John's experience became a powerful reminder that it's never too late to pursue what truly matters to you. At their next family gathering, John found himself surrounded by curious faces eager to hear more about his trip. "I can't believe you did it, Dad," his daughter said. "You always talked about going to Paris, but I never thought you'd actually make it happen. I guess I never realized how important it was to you." John smiled, grateful for the chance to share his story. "It took a long time to get here," he said. "But the most important thing is, I never gave up on that dream." It wasn't always easy to make time for it, but now I know, if you want something badly enough, you find a way to make it happen, no matter what stage of life you're in. His words sparked something in his children and close friends, something that was more than just admiration. It was the realization that they too had dreams and aspirations that they had set aside. John's journey wasn't just about Paris, it was a call to action for everyone who heard his story to start thinking about their own dreams, regardless of how long they had been deferred. As the weeks passed, John began to notice subtle shifts in the attitudes and behaviors of his loved ones. His son, who had always been focused on his career, started talking about traveling more once his work commitments allowed. "You know, Dad," he said one evening, "I've been thinking about how much I've put off. I always said I'd go to Italy, but it feels like there's always something else to take care of first. Maybe it's time to actually plan that trip." Similarly, one of their close friends, Jane, who had spent years caring for aging parents, expressed a newfound desire to take a solo trip. "I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon," she confided, "but I never thought I could take the time for myself. After hearing about your trip to Paris, I realized I don't want to wait anymore. Life is too short, and I need to make those memories now." For many in their circle, John's trip to Paris acted as a catalyst, awakening dormant desires and reminding them of the importance of self-care, adventure, and following through on long-held dreams. It was a revelation that came not from grand speeches, but from witnessing the quiet but powerful shift in John's own life, a shift that encouraged others to break free from the inertia that had held them back. Not only did John's journey inspire others to pursue their dreams, but it also deepened existing relationships. His friends, some of whom had known him for decades, saw a side of him they hadn't fully appreciated before, the man who, despite all his responsibilities, had never let go of his dream to see the Eiffel Tower. This realization brought a new sense of admiration and respect among those who had known John primarily for his work ethic and dedication to his family. One evening, a longtime friend named Tom called to check in. Tom had always been one of John's closest companions, yet their conversations usually centered around business, family, and the daily grind. This time, however, Tom spoke of something different. "John, I've been thinking a lot about your trip," Tom said. "I've spent most of my life putting everything else first, work, obligations, and even other people's dreams. But hearing you talk about finally doing something for yourself, after all these years, made me realize I need to start thinking about my own dreams again. I've always wanted to visit Alaska, but I've kept pushing it aside. I think it's time I make that a reality." John's journey had given Tom the courage to open up about his own desires and had inspired him to start planning his own adventure. They talked for hours that night, reminiscing about their younger years and discussing what it would take to turn Tom's dream into reality. The ripple effect of John's dream also reached beyond their immediate circle of family and friends. In their small community, people began talking about the trip and what it represented. It wasn't just about seeing a famous landmark, it was about living life fully, at any age, and making time for the things that truly mattered. John's example became a quiet but powerful source of inspiration for many. The local church, where John and Linda had been active for years, invited them to share their experience with the congregation. As John stood before the group, he felt a mix of pride and humility. It wasn't about bragging or showing off. It was about sharing a message of hope and encouragement for others who might be stuck in the routine of life, believing that their dreams were out of reach. "Life has a way of getting in the way of our dreams," John began. "But it doesn't have to. We don't have to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect circumstances. We just need to start. I spent many years putting my dreams on hold, thinking I'd get to them someday. But someday turned into decades. And finally, I realized, if I don't go after what I want now, I may never get the chance. And you know what? That's okay. Because today is the day I start living my dream. His words resonated deeply with many in the congregation. People from all walks of life approached him afterward to thank him for the reminder that dreams don't expire with age. Some shared their own dreams for the first time, and others asked for advice on how to make their dreams come true. It was clear that John's trip had inspired something much larger than he had anticipated. As the months passed, John and Linda began to realize the true significance of their trip. It wasn't just about the personal fulfillment they had gained or the joy of checking off a bucket list item. It was about creating a legacy, not just for themselves, but for everyone they touched. They had given others permission to dream, to act on those dreams, and to live life fully, no matter their age. John, reflecting on the impact his journey had had, felt a deep sense of pride. It wasn't about the Eiffel Tower or the trip itself, it was about the ripple effect that had been set into motion. People were reevaluating their priorities, reclaiming their dreams, and deciding to live more intentionally. And this wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a shift in how they approached life moving forward. The ripple effect of John's dream was far-reaching. It spread to friends, family, and even strangers, inspiring them to reevaluate their own lives and pursue their passions. Through John's example, people began to see that it wasn't too late to follow their dreams and live fully. In the end, John's lifelong dream of visiting the Eiffel Tower became more than just a personal achievement. It became a source of inspiration for everyone around him, encouraging them to embrace their own possibilities and begin chasing their dreams. Returning from their life-changing trip to Paris, John and Linda found themselves with a renewed sense of freedom, one that was not just about physical travel, but also about how they viewed life, their priorities, and their possibilities. For John, the trip had not only been a dream realized, but also a revelation about the importance of living intentionally and making room for joy and personal fulfillment. He had spent the majority of his life working hard, adhering to the responsibilities of family and career, often postponing his own desires for the sake of others. But now, he was beginning to understand that it wasn't selfish to chase your dreams, it was necessary for a truly fulfilling life. As he sat with Linda in the quiet evenings after returning home, he found himself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few short weeks. "I never realized how much I was holding myself back," he admitted one night, as they sat on their porch overlooking the familiar neighborhood. "I was so focused on what I thought I should do, I forgot to think about what I actually wanted to do." Paris wasn't just a place, it was a reminder to start living for myself, too. Linda, always supportive and understanding, nodded in agreement. "You've always been so dedicated to others, John. But now, I can see that this journey has unlocked something in you, something that was waiting to be rediscovered. You've given so much of yourself over the years. It's time to embrace the freedom to live for you, too." With this new sense of freedom, John and Linda started to embrace life with a fresh perspective. No longer bound by the constraints of someday or later, they began to approach each day with curiosity, excitement, and a willingness to explore new possibilities. For John, the idea that he could still pursue new interests, new goals, and new adventures was both liberating and invigorating. One afternoon, as they sat down to their usual cup of tea, John suggested an idea that had been brewing in his mind. "Linda, I've been thinking. What if we took up a hobby we've never tried before? We've always talked about learning to dance, maybe it's time we actually do it. What's stopping us?" Linda's eyes lit up. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's funny, isn't it? We've spent so many years focusing on everyone else's needs, but now we're free to explore our own passions. Dancing sounds like so much fun. And just like that, John and Linda enrolled in dance classes, discovering a new shared passion that brought them closer together. It wasn't just about learning new steps or mastering routines, it was about embracing a new chapter in their lives, one where they allowed themselves the freedom to explore, to make mistakes, and to enjoy the process of learning something entirely new. John's transformation didn't just happen in terms of activities, it was also about his mindset. He realized that, over the years, he had held himself back in more ways than he had consciously recognized. The need to always be responsible, always be the provider, always be the steady rock for his family had shaped him into someone who rarely took risks or embraced the unknown. He had been so focused on the future, on making sure his family was provided for, on saving for retirement, on planning for what's next, that he had forgotten the joy of the present moment. During a quiet evening, as he reflected on his life and the changes he had undergone, he said to Linda, "It's strange. For so long, I thought I was doing the right thing by putting everything aside for the future. But now, I see that the future isn't guaranteed. I need to stop waiting for the perfect time to do things. We have to make the time for what matters now." Linda smiled and squeezed his hand. "It's not about waiting, John. It's about making the most of the time we have. We've spent so many years building a life together, and now, we have the freedom to live it however we want. And that's a gift." With this newfound freedom, John and Linda began to redefine what retirement meant for them. Rather than viewing it as the end of their active lives or as a time to simply rest and relax, they saw it as an opportunity for reinvention. Retirement wasn't about slowing down, it was about embracing a phase of life that was full of possibility. John, who had always been a hard worker, realized that retirement didn't mean he had to stop contributing or learning. It was simply a shift in how he chose to spend his time. He began volunteering at the local community center, teaching young people about his professional experiences. He was able to mentor and share his knowledge, but without the pressure and demands of a full-time job. Linda, on the other hand, took up painting, a hobby she had always dreamed of but had never found the time to explore. As she began creating her own art, she found joy in expressing herself in ways she never had before. The freedom to explore new passions brought a sense of fulfillment that she had been missing for years. Together, they also started traveling more, not just to the grand destinations like Paris, but to smaller towns and cities they had never visited. The idea was no longer just to check off locations on a map, but to immerse themselves in new cultures, meet new people, and embrace the unexpected joys of the journey. They knew that their travels would now be centered on experience, discovery, and the joy of being together. Perhaps the most profound impact of their newfound freedom was the ability to appreciate the everyday moments, the quiet mornings, the unhurried walks in the park, the conversations with friends, and the simple joys of life. John and Linda had spent so many years caught up in the hustle and bustle of work, family obligations, and long-term planning that they had forgotten to truly savor the present. But now, every moment seemed to carry a new sense of appreciation. One afternoon, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset, John remarked, "You know, Linda, I think the best part of all of this isn't just the big adventures. It's the little things, being here with you, enjoying this quiet time. I don't think I ever appreciated just how special these moments were until now." Linda smiled warmly. "I feel the same way. It's like we're seeing the world in a new light, one where we don't have to rush. We can just be, and that's enough." As John and Linda embraced their new freedom, they found that life had a new sense of purpose. They no longer felt that their days were dictated by a need to achieve or fulfill obligations. Instead, they focused on living each day with intention, whether that meant pursuing new hobbies, spending more time with loved ones, or simply enjoying the freedom to make their own choices. John began to realize that this was what he had been missing all those years, this sense of purpose that came from doing what he loved, in the way he wanted. He felt liberated not just because he had checked off a dream like visiting the Eiffel Tower, but because he had finally learned to live fully in the moment, with a heart open to whatever the future held. The sense of freedom that John and Linda experienced after their trip to Paris transformed their lives. It wasn't just about the freedom to travel or explore new activities, it was the freedom to live with intention, to pursue joy and passion, and to embrace life on their own terms. They had come to understand that true freedom wasn't about age, circumstance, or retirement. It was about having the courage to live authentically, to follow your heart, and to never stop discovering the world and yourself. As they moved forward, they did so with a deep sense of fulfillment and a renewed commitment to living fully. Every day became an opportunity to explore new possibilities, to build new memories, and to live life to its fullest, no matter where it took them.